Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday right here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, we'll be speaking to a former ICE director who served under President Obama to learn about President-elect Trump's immigration policies as he names Tom Burges as his border czar. While Trump's intentions on immigration are clear, his NATO allies also expect him to remain committed to the alliance and continue supporting Ukraine in its conflict against Russia. And Arab and Muslim leaders gather in the Saudi capital Riyadh for a summit addressing the wars in Gaza and Lebanon. Plus, we'll be discussing the price of Bitcoin, which has risen above the $80,000 mark for the first time ever. This follows Donald Trump's decisive victory in the US election last week. Hello and welcome to the program. The US President-elect Donald Trump has pledged to launch the largest deportation operation in the country's history. And helping him to do so is a man who's been dubbed the border czar. We're talking here about the hardline immigration official Tom Burges, whom Trump has chosen to be in charge of overseeing both the northern and southern borders, in addition to supervising maritime and aviation security in the upcoming Republican administration. Well, for more on that, we can speak now to John Sandweg, who is the former acting director of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, better known as ICE. Now, you served under President Barack Obama. It's great to have you with us. I want to start by asking you about Tom Burges, who's also the former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Have you worked with him at all, and what do you think he brings to the job?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to spend several years working pretty closely, actually, with Tom. Look, for what President Trump is looking for, there's no doubt Tom is the right guy. He commands a lot of respect and loyalty from the ICE agents who are out in the field. He has a long, an extensive history doing immigration enforcement, and certainly his mindset is, as you indicated, hardline, tough enforcement kind of approach. But of course, look, Tom is the mission he's trying to carry out here is going to be a very challenging one, simply because the agency, lacks the resources, and there's some serious legal challenges that the administration is going to face.
Yeah, he's going to be in charge of, quote, all deportation of illegal aliens back to their countries of origin. As I said in the intro, the largest deportation operation of undocumented migrants in the country's history. Now, this is going to be one of Trump's priorities when he gets the keys to the White House. Would you say this is, though, a case of easier said than done?
I mean, absolutely. Now, setting aside the politics and frankly, setting aside the, whether this is a good idea or not, just looking at the, what they've promised during the campaign, and then in terms of what it's going to take to actually implement that, yeah, the president faces an incredible challenge. First of all, he's inheriting an agency that's resourced to deport roughly 250 to 400,000 people. So he's going to have a massive expansion of the agency to begin with, and that's going to first take Congress giving him, significant billions and billions of dollars of increased appropriations. And then he's got to deploy that. So that means just basic things like hiring people, building, offices for them, building detention centers, all of those kind of logistics. That alone will potentially take years. But more importantly is that under US law, before you can deport a migrant, they're entitled to a full and fair hearing before an immigration court. And there they can offer defenses potentially to deportation. It could be obviously asylum is one of the big ones, but it could also be that even that they're a United States citizen. The problem, though, is those courts are incredibly backlogged, and there are nowhere near enough judges to handle 11 million cases. So I think what we're also going to see is the president is going to try to find ways to bypass those courts, whether through executive orders or regulations, but basically to try to strip down the due process that these migrants are entitled to. And then obviously in doing so, he's going to face some serious legal challenges where various advocacy groups and migrants challenge his authority to do that.
So what you're saying is that even if Trump manages to find a way around some of the legal challenges and some of the legal obstacles, there's this much bigger obstacle by the sounds of things on the logistical front. Detention centres, as you say, not enough beds, not enough officials, and of course those people have all got to be trained. Would you say it's a case of the logistical obstacles being bigger than the legal ones then?
Well, I think the legal ones are ultimately going to be the most difficult for him. But yeah, I mean, look, this is just simple math. I mean, it's like anything else. The more you invest in terms of the number of agents and the number of detention beds, you need all those basic things to pull this off. And while this isn't like it's not something you talk about on the campaign trail, but the bottom line is that even if the money was appropriated tomorrow, and first of all, he doesn't have the budget authority to hire the number of people he needs to hire, but then going out and finding them. So you're looking at an agency today that's about 6,000 to 7,000 immigration enforcement agents. They can arrest approximately 500,000 people in a year, maybe 600,000, and about 250,000 of those people are removed, are deported in that year. So you could just see how you need to, increase the size. That if you want to get just to 1 million a year, he probably needs to increase the agency fourfold. To do that, not only will require, their budget currently, ICE's budget is approximately $9 billion. So if you figure that it's going to take at least another, 3 to 4 times that, he has to get Congress to give him another, $25 billion. And even if he gets it, he needs to go out and find people who are suitable to be agents, perform background checks. They require security clearances. Then they have to go to the training academy. The system is just not built to handle this massive expansion in such a short period of time. And I know it's kind of boring and it's not something that politicians talk about on the campaign trail, but just the logistics of that make it almost an impossible task.
Tell us about the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Now, this involves rounding up foreigners and deporting them, people who are deemed to belong to enemy countries. I mean, why is this being discussed in this particular context?
Well, as I said a minute ago, even if he was able to build the apparatus where he has enough officers to go out and arrest, these 11 million migrants or even just 1 million in a year, and he has enough detention beds, he still faces this other problem, which is the immigration courts. And the immigration courts, is where the migrants can present their claims or their defenses to deportation. And that even if there were enough judges, that process can be tedious and a little bit slow. It's a legal process. So what the president and his advisors are doing is they're looking for ways to get around that legal process. And one thing they've seized on is this Alien Enemies Act. And as you indicated, it's a 1798 law that was passed that gives the president during the time of war the authority to declare individuals who are citizens of countries with whom we're at war, the power to detain them or deport them unilaterally, basically without due process. So why this has come up is because, look, Tom Homan, other advisors who are working for the president, Stephen Miller, they know that even if they were able to arrest everybody, they run right into this problem in the courts. So they're looking for ways to get around it, and they're seizing upon this as a possible path. Now, look, this is going to get challenged in a U.S. court. I'm not sure that the application that President Trump is looking potentially to use it for is going to survive legal review. I mean, the times it's been used, it's been incredibly controversial and probably, including the internment of Japanese American citizens during World War II, something the United States later apologized for and paid reparations to the families of those people. Even if he was able to deploy it, though, like that, it was only been used in times of actual war. So I think what would happen here is the president would claim that we're at some sort of war with, with all these countries invading us with their migrants from, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. I just am not confident in any way that it's going to survive an ultimate legal review. But of course, this is, I think, what we can expect, a lot of very aggressive and novel kind of approaches to immigration enforcement, followed quickly by legal challenges and injunctions. And, it's what we saw 4 years ago.
Yeah, so just moving on and wrapping up that point about that Alien Enemies Act. I mean, basically, it sounds as though, okay, we know the act from the context you described, the Second World War, the Japanese and German Americans being put in internment camps. And as you say, that was a time of war. But short of declaring war on all of the countries from whom these people come and then deporting them to them or interring them, this simply wouldn't have any application in this particular context. Does that roughly sum it up?
That roughly sums it up. Yeah. And look, the challenge here too is that the number of nations we're seeing today at our US border, dozens of nations, whether it's Russians, Chinese, Haitians, El Salvadorans, the list goes on and on. You can't readily declare war against all those individuals. And again, because of, look, I got to tell you, the context with which this was used in the past is obviously extremely controversial. So there's a political element to this as well. Frankly, that's a larger concern with all of his plans, is that when you look at the demographics of who these 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States are, you see a couple of things quickly. One is, they've been here a long time. They've lived in this country. That means they've developed ties. They go to churches in America. They work at jobs with other Americans. They have, they're integrated in our community, but also they have US citizen family members. They've often had children or they've married US citizens. They can't fix their own immigration status, but their families are citizens. And so if you get to 11 million, by definition, you're starting to separate those families or rip those families apart. Politically, I just don't know, if the United States has the appetite, even if he could pull off the Alien Enemies Act, for the construction of mass detention camps where we start ripping the mothers of, young U.S. citizen children out and putting them in those camps. I don't know if we really have the appetite for that in this country.
Well, there's a suggestion that the military could have a role in all of this. Do you see that as being a possible route to go down, enlisting the help of the army?
Yeah, I think, look, he's looking again at these two big challenges. One is the due process challenge, and that's why he's looking at things like the Alien Enemies Act. And then he's looking at this logistical challenge I referenced at the outset. So he's trying to figure out ways, how do I ramp up the number of agents quickly? How do I build detention beds quickly? So I think, yeah, he's going to look at using the military, and he's looking at probably also at state and local law enforcement, one thing we haven't talked about, but that is, trying to get local police, local sheriff's deputies to get involved in immigration enforcement. Look, from a short-term perspective, it'll provide a boost to the agency, and it certainly can increase the number of arrests, and certainly probably they could build some low-cost, quick detention centers on military bases. But it's not going to solve his bigger logistics problem, which is he still is going to need tens of billions of dollars of federal immigration agents. There's only so much that military officers can do. They can watch the border, they can stand guard over detainees. Maybe there's a little bit more he could get them to do. Certainly there's more that he could get state and local police to do, but ultimately these might maybe make his logistical problem a little easier, but they certainly aren't going to solve it. But again, a lot of this is, like, I hate to say it, but it's political theater, right? He wants to make it look like he's doing everything possible to take on undocumented immigration in this country, and using the military obviously is a very powerful symbol of the president's commitment to doing that.
And when it comes to a template, a blueprint for doing something of this nature, I mean, there are a couple of examples, parallels that can be drawn. The British government tried to deport a number of migrants to Rwanda, the so-called Rwanda plan. The Italians have done that with some success in an arrangement with Albania. But would you say either of those had been a template that perhaps the Trump administration would want to take note of and perhaps learn some lessons from?
He might. So one thing to keep in mind is that, a lot of this mass deportation plan has been focused on the 11 million people who already live in the United States. But that's not all that's getting pulled on the immigration services in the United States. Obviously, we still have a significant number of people crossing the border. And although those numbers are way down, you still have 50,000 new asylum cases at the border every single month. You also have people who are legally present. They were here on, they were given permanent residency or a work visa, and then they get convicted of a crime while they're here. Those people are also queued up for deportation. So at the border, though, he needs to, obviously, most pressing, politically important to him is he's promised day one to solve the border crisis. I think what he's going to try to do first, before he starts looking at plans like the Rwanda plan that the British tried, the UK tried, I think what he's going to try to do is implement a rule again where he says, okay, if you have a right to make an asylum claim in the United States, but you don't have to wait for your hearing in the United States, we're going to push you into Mexico and make you wait in Mexico. He did this during his first administration to some success, and the Mexicans were remarkably flexible with him in terms of allowing large numbers of people who are not Mexican citizens to continue to wait in Mexico. It'll be interesting to see. It's a new presidency, of course, in Mexico. It'll be interesting to see if they continue to allow this. But I think first he'll try something which is similar, but again, it's just you cross the border from Mexico, you stay in Mexico. One day you get a hearing in the United States, but you wait there And by wait, I mean years. But I wouldn't be surprised if that falls apart or if that fails and he can't get control of the border. If he does start looking for something similar to that, where you can find a third country that's willing to take people back. He certainly tried some of similar things, but on a much smaller scale during the first administration. But again, I think the first approach will be Mexico, and if that fails, start looking at some of these other options.
And I'm wondering whether you think he might get pushback from his own party, the Republican Party, because, of course, if you take out 1 million perhaps low-skilled people from the US workforce, there will be potentially, won't there, a shortage of labor for doing some of the jobs that are needed to keep the economy ticking along. I mean, in the UK with Brexit, there was the issue of fruit pickers who came from different parts of Europe who suddenly went around, and that had an impact on the agricultural sector. Do you think this could end up having an impact on sections of the UK economy, of the US economy, and therefore somewhat backfiring?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, all the economists and all the data and all the studies out there demonstrate that these people provide a critical low-wage workforce in this country. And probably, look, the situation at the border, I understand why people were so frustrated in the United States, but there's also an element to this where it brought in a large number of low-wage workers who probably helped keep inflation or reduced inflation a bit and helped us kind of stop inflation in this country. Look, I think what's a good example, though, is in the first Trump administration when he did this family separation. And I don't know if you remember this, but when families would come across the border seeking asylum, they started a plan where they took the parents and criminally prosecuted them and separated them from their children. And horrifically, to this day, some of those children are still not reunited with their parents. But he did face an immediate backlash, including from within his own party, and he backed off of it. So I think as this goes forward, if he really actually is able to start reducing the undocumented population in this country, yeah, I think the business community is going to complain because we just don't have a program in this country, a legal visa program that gives them all the workers they need in agriculture, in meatpacking, in construction. But you think you're going to get backlash on the humanitarian element. And that's what happened in his first administration, is, as I said at the outset, if you start deporting 11 million people, you're separating families that include US citizens. And I'm not entirely sure that even the Republican Party understands the ramifications of that. And as they start to see it play out in real time, I'm not convinced that he's not going to get a lot of pushback from within the party for that.
Yeah, and during the campaign trail, we heard quite a lot of rhetoric on this issue. I mean, it was the most important issue on voters' minds throughout the campaign. But we heard the Trump campaign using language like poisoning the blood of the United States. There is an invasion, quote, of people entering the United States. Just looking at that poisoning the blood comment, I mean, I just want to ask your opinion, and this is the last question we have time for, unfortunately, but is there evidence that immigrants and undocumented migrants are indeed more likely to commit crimes?
All the data suggests that the immigrant communities actually commit crime at a lower rate than the general lawful, legally present population. So the answer, look, there are some bad actors in this country. There's some transnational gang members who are here unlawfully, who are operating and committing horrific crimes. There are already, every year ICE arrests 150,000 people who committed crimes in the United States who have, either were on a visa or have no legal status at all. I'm not saying that there isn't immigrant crimes, but writ large, the overwhelming majority of migrants who come to this country are seeking a better life for them and their families. That doesn't mean that they're allowed to stay here, but the idea that they are here and that's just creating this plague of crime is not borne out by all of the data, which does indicate that the immigrant community commits crimes at a lower rate than the rest of the country.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. John Sandweg, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Now, when asked if support for Ukraine had waned since Donald Trump's victory, the British Defence Minister John Healey said he expected the incoming Trump administration to remain committed to NATO and to Ukraine for as long as was necessary. While Russia remains a US adversary, Trump has maintained dialogue with President Vladimir Putin, a move that has raised eyebrows domestically, but reflecting his distinct approach to both his allies and his adversaries. Well, earlier, the Washington Post reported a phone call between the two leaders had taken place, during which Trump reportedly urged Putin not to escalate the war in Ukraine. However, the Kremlin has dismissed that report, calling it, quote, pure fiction, Well, for more on the matter, we can speak to Greg Swenson, who's the chair of Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I just want to know what you make of the reports of that call between the two men and whether you think it's consequential or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's consequential yet. And of course, you never believe anything you hear from the Kremlin. So I'm not sure I'd pay too much attention to their statements. But I do, it is clear that President Trump, he's a disruptor. And I think the word you chose, his distinct way of doing these things surely is. So I think that, he wants to end this war. There's no doubt about that. That's been very clear. Exactly how he does it will probably be a mystery for now. And I don't think he wants to really tell the world how he's going to do it. That would sort of defeat the whole purpose of it. So I think what is clear is that he wants to end the war.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has been made out of the message that a Trump victory makes and sends to Moscow. Do you think there's too much that's being made of that? And if so, and if not, what do you think the message is that Trump's victory sends to the Kremlin?
Well, I think it sends a message to the world that it probably will be a safer place because Trump is back in the White House, and that even people that didn't miss Trump, they surely missed the peace and prosperity of those years. So I think we can expect that, this will not be a forever war like we've had in the last 20 years. And that's really important to President Trump and his base and the 53% of Americans that voted for him, for that matter. So, I think it's really important that he ends the war or does his best to end the war. Ultimately, it's up to Putin, and I don't think President Trump can just, flip the switch and end this thing. I think there has to be some negotiating, and a lot of parties might be unhappy with, no one's going to be perfectly thrilled with the outcome. But I do think that there's merit to President Trump getting involved in trying to end this thing.
Indeed. I mean, there are a lot of concerns, though, about at what price peace could come. And, people saying, pursuing a policy of getting a deal done could come with a very high price, namely Ukraine having to cede land to Russia, which invaded their country illegally in their view. I mean, do you think that is, though, the price that has to be paid to end this war?
I think ultimately there has to be some compromise, and it's not pleasant. No, everybody wants Ukraine to win. It's just that right now it doesn't look like they can. I think the incrementalist approach to, from the Biden administration, of sort of drip feeding support and weapons over time that didn't really enable, the Ukrainians to either win or at least defend themselves in a better way than they were able to. So. But I don't think that, we can't turn back the clock, right? I don't think that escalating at this point is wise. So I think it's very clear if President Trump is making it clear to Putin not to escalate, I don't think Putin will. And I think he made that clear to him in 2019 and 20. And you didn't see much movement from Putin. So, we also have to remind ourselves to not just look at or listen to what President Trump says, or what the press says he says, which is always two different things, but also look at what he does. And I think the way he came into office and immediately imposed sanctions on Nord Stream 2, he immediately sent lethal weapons, including Javelin missiles to Ukraine, after the Biden and Obama years where, they were sending non-lethal weapons, blankets and MREs to a U.S. airbase in Poland and then trucking them in commercial trucks to Kyiv because both Obama and Biden were afraid of offending Putin in some way. And I don't think Trump ever really feared Putin at all. And you could see it in the way he handled things, again, with sanctions, with the shipping lethal weapons. So you could even make the same argument for how he handled Iran. And day one, Biden came in and started appeasing Iran and not enforcing the sanctions. And so in both cases, you've seen a President Trump that's done what's right in terms of relations with Russia. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But at the same time, he would not have advocated the Biden policy of, increasing oil prices by being hostile to our own energy sector and then having Jake Sullivan go to Moscow and beg Putin to pump more oil. It's kind of a humiliating moment for the U.S. when Jake Sullivan was doing that, National Security Advisor, of course. So, that of course was before the invasion of Ukraine, but it just demonstrates how weak and the Biden administration was, and how they were really appeasing our adversaries, both Russia, Iran, and others. So I think it'll be a refreshing return to have President Trump back in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, President Trump has said he can end this war in 24 hours, but there could be those who argue that that's not necessarily strategically the best way to go about ending this war. The best way to go about ending it would surely be to negotiate with Russia when Russia's in a perceived position of weakness on the battlefield, not using an artificial 24-hour time frame.
Yeah, I do think sometimes he exaggerates the 24 hours, although it won't necessarily be 24 hours starting on January 20th. It's really starting now. And so I think there's a chance that it can happen, and quickly. But also that point of Russian weakness, that's probably passed as well. I mean, there were probably moments during the last 2.5 years would have been a better time to negotiate from a position of strength. We all wish we could turn the clock back and do things differently, but I don't think I don't think it's wise to wait another 2 years, because more people are going to die between now and then. So, I don't think anybody, and especially this administration, wants war. He's used military strength, tactically and temporarily, and he's used it wisely. You saw that with the terminating General Soleimani in Iran back in early 2020. You've seen it in how he handled the Russians in Syria. He actually had, U.S. troops actually killed Russian soldiers in Syria. So these are moments where Trump's disruptive nature and his sort of unfiltered, or not, let's say, non-traditional methods, at least in what he says and the way he negotiates, it is new. He is disruptive, but in many ways, it's what he does that's really important. And people, again, they miss the peace that we had in his administration. And I think in many respects, he's coming into a world that's a much more dangerous place than the one he left in 2020. But I do think he is a man of peace and wants peace. And if he has to talk Zelensky or Putin into compromises, so be it. I think what's clear, though, there will be very, very strict, agreements that Putin has to uphold. And I think, it's the old Ronald Reagan line, trust but verify. I think it would be he'll have serious conditions for any kind of a peace deal that Russia cannot cross certain red lines. And Trump will be very serious about that.
Okay, and so if indeed Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin did speak in the last 24 hours, you wouldn't necessarily say that was the beginning of the 24-hour window for ending this conflict?
No, that would be, somewhat of a miracle. But I do think, yes, that's a funny way of President Trump to describe his interest, that he is. I think what we should take from that is not take it literally that it will happen in 24 hours, but that he's quite serious about this. And I think it was, it's important for him to point that out. It's important for him to recognize that, there were no wars, major wars started under him. And remember, the invasion of Crimea in 2014 was under Obama, Biden. And of course, the invasion of the other parts of Ukraine were under, Biden, Harris. So I think if we look at his track record on this particular topic and many others, people look back and think, okay, things were a lot better then. And the president and the administration will do their best to return the world to the peace we had in those days.
And when it comes to NATO, what sort of a change might the advent of another Trump presidency bring with regards to the strength of that alliance and how much support it gets from Washington?
Yeah, Tom, it's a great question, and it will be a much stronger alliance for one reason. Yes, you'll have a continuation of the argument that the countries in NATO, the European countries, should meet their commitment of 2% of GDP. You're seeing that we're possibly up to 21 countries by the end of this year. So that progress should continue. But more importantly, it's defense spending in the U.S. It's rebuilding the military. He did that in his term. And even though his rhetoric is a little disruptive and the way he delivers these things is, not exactly diplomatic at times, But when he dressed down the Germans in 2018, he wasn't very polite about it. It was something they hadn't heard that kind of language from a president or a leader, but he was right, and it worked at least for some of the other countries in NATO. It hasn't worked terribly well with the Germans. They're still lagging, and as the biggest economy in Europe, they shouldn't be. But
yeah, but actually, sorry, just to interrupt you there, Greg, and this is a really interesting point that was made by the German Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, who said, in fact, the 2% spend of GDP on defense might actually not even be enough. That's by the Germans' own admission.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And look, I think all the countries need to spend more. The UK is doing their part, at 2.5%. And so they're playing above their weight. But I think what's really important to remember, yes, we want the Europeans to spend more. There's no doubt. But remember, Joe Biden cut defense spending in the U.S. 3% a year for 3 years, probably including year 4. We'll see the same sort of reduction. And that should be worrisome to NATO and to our European allies. And that is like completely destructive in terms of the alliance and the strength of the alliance. So, we'll see Trump come in and increase defense spending and do the things that should have been done the last 4 years. He did it in his first term. That's, a 9% cut in 3 years. That's 4.5% of the total NATO defense spending. That's what we should be worried about. So, and if Biden or if Harris had won, or either one of them, the defense spending in the U.S. would be down to 2.4% by 2030. Right now, it's just under 3%. That is not enough. We need to get it back to 4, 5, 6%. And that's better for our allies. It's better for the world.
Okay. Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Moving on now, in his statement at the Arab Islamic Summit in Riyadh, the Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati declared that his country is facing a historic existential crisis which threatens Lebanon's present and future. He also emphasized that Israel cannot continue its aggression and violations of Lebanon's sovereignty without accountability, whilst calling for a strengthened Lebanese army presence in the south to assert the state's authority over the border. So how close are we to a ceasefire in Lebanon? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined once again here on Al Arabiya News by the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Fouad Siniora. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again, Prime Minister. We've heard from the current, the caretaker Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, speaking at the Arab League and Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Riyadh. He said, as I said in the intro, Lebanon going through an unprecedented crisis. What was he seeking to achieve by making those comments? Is that a call for help?
First of all, good day, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you. And actually, I endorse what the Prime Minister Najib Mikati has said. Well, definitely, we are passing through an existential crisis. And in fact, Lebanon is really suffering from this very bad situation, not only in terms of the number of casualties and the number of injured, which is quite significant, but at the same time, with the extent of damage and destruction, and the extent of suffering of the very large number of Lebanese who have been forced and to be displaced from their villages and towns, and they are everywhere, scattered everywhere in the country, which is definitely much graver than the situation that we experienced in 2006, and in terms of numbers of displaced, as well as in terms of casualties and injured, and the extent of destruction. It is definitely a call for the need for an immediate call for a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, and at the same time, a call for help. And at the same time, it is a call for all the Lebanese factions to understand that it is very important for them to agree and immediately to call for a meeting by the Speaker of the House in order to elect a president. It cannot continue as such. And actually, Lebanon now is in the 25th month without electing a president. So far, this problem is there, and we have to really find a solution. For sure, that what is supposed that the Arab and Islamic Summit to do is to support Lebanon in its call for help in terms of putting more pressure so that an immediate ceasefire can really be taken and to hold, and at the same time for arranging for immediate help for really taking care of the very large number of displaced people. And we are in winter, unlike what was the case in 2006 during summer. And this in winter, it is very difficult to really house this number of people under very difficult weather conditions. And at the same time, there is a need to consider what's to be done after. For sure, there is an important thing to be done at the level of Lebanon. At the level of Lebanon, it's very important for the Lebanese to come together and to decide very clearly and firmly that Lebanon will implement in all its provisions the Security Council Resolution 1701. Actually, I was there in 2006 as Prime Minister, and effectively, Israel did not really make sure to implement this resolution, and Hezbollah at the same time was not sincere and to implement this resolution. Now we are all witnessing the result of this let's say laxity and non-firmness in taking let's say the necessary decision to implement. But effectively, let me add something in here, is that not only the problem started in 2006, and definitely the problem did not start on the 7th of October 2023. The problem that we are facing still taking different shapes and different versions of it, which is the inability so far to find a real solution to the problem of the Palestinians. You cannot have, let's say, a permanent just peace if we cannot really make all the necessary effort in order to come to the crux of the problem. The Palestinians still looking to really put their need to have a state for them that really recognize their identity as Palestinians. Sure. And this is the problem that has been moving from one year into another, as well from 1948, and effectively in 1990 and in 1991, you remember that we had the Madrid Conference, we had the Oslo Agreement, and all these, let's say, Security Council and United Nations resolutions have not been implemented. To the contrary, things have been dragging, and with nothing really being implemented. The Arab Summit that took hold in 2002 in Beirut, the Arab Peace Initiative was issued then, and still it is not implemented. Okay. In addition to this, the summit that was held exactly a year ago, on the 11th of November 2023, if we look at it today, actually all the provisions of this resolution that was made by the Arab and Islamic Summit, nothing of it has been implemented.
And just turning our eye to the current summit. Sorry to interrupt you. The summit happening in Riyadh. We've got 22 members of the Arab League there, 57 members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I mean, Lebanon's Prime Minister is surrounded by friends, isn't he? I mean, there's overwhelming support in that room in Riyadh for your country, isn't there?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I don't deny that. You see, the support for Lebanon is fine. I'm saying what has been really said about in 223 regarding Israel. Israel has not implemented anything. That's what I'm referring to.
Sure.
I'm not referring to the help of the Arabs. To the contrary, I think the Arabs have been really standing by the side of Lebanon and want to support Lebanon, and they really are after for the implementation of an immediate ceasefire.
And on that note, Prime Minister, I mean, I want to ask you about the ceasefire and the progress towards it, because we're getting some confusing messages from both sides. We're being told by the Israeli side that a ceasefire proposal has, in fact, been discussed and approved, but Hezbollah saying they haven't received it. I mean, why do you think we're getting these two very different messages on that front?
Well, actually, I mean, this is exactly, I am really disturbed about this matter, because we haven't seen anything of the sort, and I haven't heard from the Prime Minister any indication that he has received any proposal in this regard. It seems that there is some sort of a difference of opinion actually within the Israeli government in this regard. But anyhow, there are some let's say statements that are being made here and there referring to something that has to be issued or has to be declared, which we are not aware of. Anyhow, what we really are after is that there should be a ceasefire, and there should be an implementation of 1701, and there should be a new president and a new government that takes the responsibility of the implementation and the full implementation of 1701. Because with what we have now, we don't have a president, and we don't have a full functioning government. We have a caretaker government which is not able to really do anything what it is required to do.
But it does seem like a lot's happening, because we've got that summit in Riyadh. There's the talk of the ceasefire happening, with a proposal being put forward by Israel, although we're not sure on the status of it. And then we've also heard from Hezbollah, the spokesperson Mohammed Afif, saying that since the election of Donald Trump, he says last week, there have been contacts between Washington, Moscow, Tehran, and other capitals. I'm wondering what you make of that. Do you think that's true? And if it is true, does it make you optimistic?
Well, I look forward. Let me put it this way. I don't like to use the word optimistic or pessimistic. I look forward that there should be a decision to be taken. It is not in the interest of all. I mean, on the Arab side, Israeli side, on the Western Front, in terms of United States and other European countries and other countries in the world, including Russia, including China, they are all after. But I mean, there is still a distance between the will and the readiness to push towards the implementation of such a resolution, and making sure to be respected at the same time. So this is where we are, you see, in this respect. There has been differences in opinion, it seems, in Israel, which we have seen, you see, and everybody knows that there was let's say a resolution was some sort of let's say adopted by 10 countries, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, and others, about the implementation of a ceasefire for 60 days, and during which so many things can take place. And actually, what really happened, although Israel expressed its opinion at that time, it is going to accept it, and all of a sudden they decided not to, and you know what really happened afterwards. So this is where we are now.
Okay.
Is that there has been a great deal of talking, but without any implementation on behalf of Israel.
But you haven't reacted to something that was said in that statement by the Hezbollah spokesperson. He said, since the election of Donald Trump last week. And I'm just wondering whether you think, viewed from Beirut, the change of administration in the United States, which admittedly is still 70 days away, whether you think that's going to change anything, whether you think that's likely to change the dynamic?
Yes, I tend to think that, let's say, some players, let's say, probably on the Israeli side, there might be an interest by the Israeli government and by Netanyahu himself is to stall and not to really move towards something if he can. I mean, if he doesn't receive major pressures from the present administration of the United States. So, I mean, he is betting that he might have a situation might be different. Although President-elect Trump has been saying that I want this to finish before I even assume my responsibilities. So this is on behalf of the Israeli side. On behalf of the Iranian side, which up till now is really has a role to play. In fact, they may tend to think that it might be better to arrive at a solution now with the present administration, and not with the upcoming one. Particularly that President-elect has been saying, I'm going to resort to excessive, let's say, sanctions. So maybe interested to get into a decision now. So this is as far as Iran, and as far as all the Arab world, as far as Lebanon and the Lebanese are definitely for arriving in an immediate ceasefire. The same thing is definitely for Hezbollah, unless actually they might be pressured otherwise by the Iranians.
I mean, talking about Hezbollah, it's really interesting to hear what the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has said about Hezbollah. They said, He says that they are defeated. Do you think that's actually the case?
Let me tell you something. You see, definitely this is what the Israelis want to say. And this is the one to say that in order to justify their position vis-a-vis their, let's say, the Israeli public opinion. Actually, let me tell you something, and we have to be very careful about it. Hezbollah is definitely deep-rooted in Lebanon among his supporters. And as you know, during that period, he has made it a point to convince the people that he is the defender of the Lebanon and a good part of the Lebanese and the Shiites in general. And besides that, I consider, this is my estimate, is that the presence of Hezbollah in Lebanon is not only, let's say, among those who are on the military side. They have a large number of military people, but they have a large number among, let's say, the various institutions that they have created over the last years. I mean, social, medical institutions, let's say, educational institutions, at the same time, business ones, and so on. I tend to think that there might be, among all the various institutions that they have created, military as well as civil institutions, there are about 80,000 in the payroll. So that's why they have a major support. I mean, what we're speaking, 80,000 on the payroll, it means about 350,000 people are depending on Hezbollah. So this is something that one should not forget. And in this regard, what is important is to really try to approach this situation from a different point of view, other than considering that they are finished. They are not finished. And it is very important to look at matters from an angle that really bring the supporters of Hezbollah back to the Lebanese state. They have to really behave accordingly that there is the only way for survival is to get back to the state. I was visiting this morning the high spiritual leader, Adil Khatib, of the Islamic Shiite institutions. And the first statement that he has made today in front of me, and he issued it, that they are actually dependent on the state and to be the state, the sole decision maker in Lebanon. So this is very important situation. The problem now is, unlike what some people say, that Hezbollah is finished and let's try to see how we can we can deal with that situation.
Yeah, Hezbollah certainly doesn't sound like they think they're finished. They've been saying
Sorry?
Hezbollah doesn't sound like they feel they're finished. They've been saying, that same spokesperson says, we are, quote, ready for a long war. But I wanted to move on from Hezbollah and ask you about something else, because we were talking about the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, and some of the comments he's been making there. He says as well that he hopes that Lebanon will join other countries in normalizing relations with Israel. I mean, that feels still, doesn't it, like a very long way off, doesn't it?
A very long way off. Let me say. What he's saying, Hezbollah, I mean, what is by the Israeli minister, it is his interest in saying so. What the spokesman of Hezbollah, again, it is his interest in saying that we are for a long war, we are ready for this and that. I mean, let's look at it wisely, and let's have our feet on the ground. They have been, let's say, getting a major blow. We have to understand that, but not to the extent that if they are finished. They are not finished, and it is not in the interest of anybody to really make major wrong assumptions that will end up that is not in the interest of anybody. I think what is important is that to really embrace Hezbollah under the let's say the authority of the state, to bring them together and to really find solutions for them, particularly finding a solution for 1.2 million that have been displaced and they have to go back to their villages. So we have to really again bring things in order to have such a thing administered by the Lebanese state with the donors, by solely the Lebanese state and the donors, and no intervention by Hezbollah and others, or Amal, whatever it is, in order to embrace these people and let them believe and that they have no other place to go other than the Lebanese state to become the sole decision maker in the country. This is what I believe. I believe that more, what do you call it, confidence building measures, they have to be taken in Lebanon, and at the same time an understanding that there is nothing that can be done other than going back to the state. And in this regard, we have to really give recognition to the Taif agreement in the second part of it, which states very clearly that the Lebanese state should collect all the weapons of all from the various militias in the country. So this is, again, the implementation of the Taif agreement should be a heading to respect.
All right, just one last question, very briefly, if you will, Mr. Siniora. I want to ask you about the admission by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday. For the first time, he says Israel was responsible for the pager attacks 2 months ago, the attacks which, of course, targeted Hezbollah members. I mean, let's be clear, no one was really in any doubt as to who was behind that, were they?
No, actually, I mean, there has been leakage from so many places that they are the ones who did it, and effectively, I mean, let's really set aside the various convictions of people who really want to side with Israel and others on the other side. What Israel has been doing in this war is something that has not been seen during this century and the last century. I mean, the extent of humanitarian crimes that have been taken and the extent of suffering that they have and are still up till this point in time. We just have to listen to the people who are in the northern part of Gaza, there is a problem, starvation, a problem. People are without really any medical, any social support, any coverage of, let's say, even basic things are not available. They are really major suffering. It cannot continue like this. And what we have been seeing in Gaza, we are seeing some of it now in Lebanon. This cannot continue as such. The world cannot really stay silent while all these crimes, humanitarian crimes, that are being committed. Okay. That's the most important message that should reach the world. Something has to be done, and to be done soon. And Lebanon has to be saved, and it can be saved.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Fouad Siniora, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Well, during his campaign, Donald Trump made repeated claims that he could end the war in Ukraine, although he did not specifically say how he intended to achieve this. Well, joining us now to help us understand Trump's plan to end the conflict is Jim Townsend, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO policy under the Obama administration. Well, joining us to try and shape a prospect of Trump's plan to end the war in Ukraine is Jim Townsend, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO policy in the Obama administration. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I just want to ask you, what does Donald Trump's victory change, in your opinion, with regards to Washington's support for Kyiv?
Well, it changes it a lot, unfortunately. You can bet for sure that the kinds of assistance going to Ukraine under the Biden administration and even under the Obama administration will not at all be at that level, if at all. There could be an absolute embargo on assistance unless Trump wants to use it as leverage. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that's changed is that Trump is very serious about trying to come up with peace, if you will, between Russia and Ukraine. He said he could do it in 24 hours. I'm not sure about that. But already there are around town all these ideas for some type of agreement between Ukraine and Russia that really would be at the expense of Ukraine and rewarding Russia for bad behavior.
Yeah, interesting to hear the Germans saying that the war is, quote, in a decisive phase, and calling for more munitions, more support to be given to Ukraine. I'm just wondering what you read into those words, decisive phase. What makes this a decisive phase?
Well, I think that's very interesting, too. On the battlefield, we are seeing that Ukraine has not been able to really muster the counteroffensive that we were hoping to see over the last year or so. It looks like in Kursk now, which is where they did take the war to Russia, it looks like there are thousands of not just Russian, but also North Korean troops that are getting ready to try to push the Ukrainians out of Russia and back into Ukraine. And then on the Eastern Front, the Russians have been chipping away at the Ukrainian line there. And so right now the battlefield doesn't look good for Ukraine. They're hanging in there. It's not a rout. We're not seeing such an decisive moment on the battlefield. It's a war of attrition right now. But I think what we're seeing is politically, there's a decisive moment about what's going to happen when Trump becomes president and what he tries to broker in terms of Ukraine and Russia.
Of course, there are another 70 days or so to go until Donald Trump does become president again. A lot could happen during that time. Or conversely, nothing will happen during that time, because we all know from covering this war for a couple of years now that the winter months are pretty quiet on the battlefront. Everyone's sort of frozen into their positions and the ground is hard as iron. I'm just wondering whether you think there's any advantage in striking now with regards to the peace process, some sort of negotiation process, or whether it can simply wait until January and for that not to make an awful lot of difference.
Well, it's an interesting point. I think the Russians are going to want to get the Ukrainians out of Kursk before any kinds of talks start. They don't want a Ukrainian chip on the table, which is, Kursk. And they want to make sure that they are in a better position when it comes to any kind of talks. So I think they probably are seeing that the momentum for talks is suddenly starting to move. And if they want to make sure they're in a better place, the Russians want to get Ukraine out of Kursk. So I think no matter the weather, I think they're going to try to move forward. I think that, again, as I mentioned earlier, surprisingly, it's only been, not even a week since the election, and already you're hearing terms being thrown around and phone calls that had or had not taken place between Trump and Putin or Trump and Zelensky and what was discussed. So there's already talk about some type of peace agreement. And so that's moving quickly. And I'm not sure that will wait for the winter either. In the U.S., we look at the first 100 days of an administration to judge them, a new administration. And so it could be that Trump wants to have on the board some kind of a, agreement, or at least a way ahead with Ukraine, Russia, which means he's going to have to really make a lot of headway after January 20th, which is when he's going to be inaugurated. But already, as I said, there are ideas floating around out there. So I think no matter what's going to happen on the battlefield and no matter the winter, this is going to start moving quickly. And we'll just have to see what we end up with within the next few months. But it looks like it's on the move.
Do you think there's any dialogue taking place between the outgoing Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration on how best to proceed? Because, it could be argued that the best thing that could happen for all concerned is for Ukraine to be given maximum support during these next 70 days until Donald Trump becomes president, to give them a maximum number of bargaining chips to put on the table, and then for Donald Trump to be able to take the credit for having struck a deal when he does take office in January. Do you think that sort of sounds a bit like wishful thinking?
Well, no, because I think Biden right now is pushing as much out the door as he can. And of course, for Trump, that assistance can be used as leverage too. He could use that as leverage with the Ukrainians, saying, if you're not going to be willing to cut a deal, I'm going to pull back this assistance. He could also turn to the Russians and say, if you're not going to play ball and come up with some compromises here, we're going to double the amount of assistance that goes to Ukraine. So, the assistance can be used as leverage in various ways by Trump. But no matter what Trump thinks, the Biden folks are pushing it out the door. And in terms of dialogue or any kind of discussion between the Trump folks and the Biden administration, I don't think so. I don't think number one, there's not a lot of Trump people who have been empowered to talk to the Biden administration. They haven't been chosen. And also, I don't think it's kind of the Trump way to have a lot of dialogue with the outgoing presidency and those people. I think there's no love lost between those two. And so I think Trump is moving ahead with what he wants to do come hell or high water.
Not even on foreign policy. We can understand that perhaps on domestic issues, major campaign pledges that have more of a domestic impact. But when it comes to foreign policy, surely you'd have thought that foreign policy and foreign interests would sort of supersede party politics.
No, because, the way Trump has said and Vance have said, they're looking at the American role in the world and how we conduct ourselves in a very different way than the Biden people do. And a very different way than most of the presidents before Biden looked at foreign policy. You're right in terms of our past history. You would have had some discussions during the transition and transition papers. When I was in the government, we had to write transition papers about what we were doing so that the incoming group would have at least a transition book that they could see what was going on and what they might want to do about it. But I don't think in this case there's any desire on the Trump people to hear from the Biden folks about what they're doing and what they need to watch out for. I think the Trump people say, we don't care what your views are and what you have done, we're not going to do anything along the lines that you have moved in the past, and we're going to move ahead according to what Donald Trump has already said in the press and on the campaign trail, and we're going to do whatever he tells us to do now. So I don't see a lot of freelancing during this transition. I don't see a whole lot of dialogue. I can see a lot of civil servants writing transition papers that will never be read. And then we'll have to see what Trump is going to put into action. Obviously, he already has a plan, and he is beginning to work that right now. And so after January 20th, he'll be authorized to actually put these plans into motion.
Indeed, and I just want to ask you, casting your mind back to your time in the Obama administration when you looked after affairs relating to NATO. I mean, looking at how the world has changed this last decade, you know, the pre-Trump world versus the current world, I just thought it was really striking that the German foreign minister should be saying that, in fact, 2% of GDP being spent on defense might not actually be enough. And to think that 10 years ago, it almost seemed like a difficult target to get NATO member states to agree to that 2%. I mean, you have to hand it to Donald Trump that he has given NATO quite a wake-up call.
Well, you know, I think it was Putin who rang the wake-up call bell. I think the idea of having to increase defense spending and understanding how far behind the West was in terms of our own defense and our defense industry and our ability to support Ukraine in this case. I think that wake-up call came late. It should have come after the Russians went into Georgia in 2008, but it didn't. And that was right before Obama, and there was opportunities during the Obama days to pull up our socks in the West, and we got instead diverted to China and the reset with Russia early on with Hillary Clinton, you know, when she was Secretary of State. So the wake-up call came late, but it came from Putin. Now, you're right about Trump. He's always felt that the allies didn't do enough and that they can't even do the 2%. And he was beating up allies pretty badly back during his first term. That is still his view, even though 23 allies have reached 2%. And a lot of allies, including the Germans, are saying we need to do more. But that's based not so much on Trump and a second term. That's really based on what's going to happen with Ukraine, because Trump is now will be in office, and what might happen after Ukraine should it embolden Russia with a bigger military, a battle-hardened military, more modern military. What else Putin might want to do to try to resurrect imperial Russia, if you will, or communist Russia in terms of territory. That's what's making nations want to spend more money, and Germany is going to have to be the engine to all of that to really make things go in Europe in terms of European efforts. And so I'm glad to hear Germany saying that, but it's really thanks to Putin more than Trump. He certainly adds spice to it, but it's the driver is Putin.
Okay, I just want to ask you one last question, which is that when obviously, Donald Trump has spoken to around 70 world leaders now, we're told. One of them was, of course, the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky. But we're told that when that call took place, Elon Musk was present as well. I'm just wondering what you see Elon Musk's role being in all of this.
Well, we're all very interested in that. But I don't think we're going to see him as a cabinet secretary. I don't think Elon Musk is suited for the kind of work in a large bureaucratic cabinet office handling the commerce or whatever it is. I think we will see him as an advisor. He might have some kind of title, but I think he's going to be unchained, if you will. And I think he will be weighing in with Trump every day on this topic or the next topic. Maybe he'll be given some specific portfolio of something or another, sent on special missions. You know, he'll be doing that kind of thing. He also has a pretty big industry to run. And that's something I'm sure that he will take his time. But I really think he will be a factor in the next 4 years for sure. We'll hear a lot out of him. We'll hear him on X and on Truth Social too. So he's going to be certainly part of the landscape. But I don't see him occupying a formal government post the way a cabinet secretary would.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Really appreciate it. Jim Townsend, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now, the Trump effect appears to be making a mark in the world of cryptocurrencies, with Bitcoin crossing an all-time high of $80,000. After the Republicans secured the presidency and the Senate and edged closer to controlling the House, many are placing an early bet on the Trump administration. That's in the hopes that the president-elect follows through on his promises, including building a national stockpile of the digital currency. Well, for more on this, we can speak now to Peter McCormack, who is the chairman of Real Bedford FC and who is also the host of What Bitcoin Did and also the Mr. Obnoxious podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I gather you also co-own that football club with the crypto investors, the Winklevoss twins. Thank you very much for speaking to us. I just want to start by asking you, and Bitcoin crossing the $82,000 mark in Monday trading, and I just want to ask you why you think it's spiking like this.
Well, actually, it's crossed 84,000 just now, which is quite interesting. It's moving pretty fast. Look, I think the main reason is similar to the rest of the markets. I think the markets are very confident that under a Trump administration, which is hopefully going to be more pro-business and more pro-Bitcoin than the Biden administration, that it's an opportunity now to invest in the cryptocurrency Bitcoin without risk of too much bureaucracy and regulatory oversight under the Biden administration, with Gary Gensler at the head of the SEC and Elizabeth Warren's anti-crypto army. There was certainly a number of attacks that came both from the state and then subsequently from the media. So I feel like with Trump being pro-BTC and pro-business, he came to the Bitcoin conference. He's talked about wanting to support miners in America, that I think a lot of people are now pretty confident that the administration won't be getting in the way of the industry. But secondly, this hasn't happened in isolation. If you look at the markets have responded well to Trump too. So I think that overall, this is just a more confident outlook from people, whether they're in business or within the Bitcoin industry itself.
So, Peter, basically what you're saying is the Trump pump, as some people are dubbing it, is making people more enthusiastic about cryptocurrencies because there'll be less regulation. I mean, is there an overwhelming perception that the outgoing Biden administration's been somehow hostile to the whole cryptocurrency universe?
I mean, it's just not just a feeling. It's based in fact. They have been hostile, both with legislation and the way they've built up various factions within the US government, which has gone after what is really the freedoms and liberty and the rights that people want to be able to hold Bitcoin as an asset and use Bitcoin in their day-to-day business. The US dollar has been debased continually. We've seen massive amounts of inflation. We've seen that also here in the UK with the pound and across Europe. Bitcoin has been a kind of safe haven for a lot of people trying to escape inflation. It is the hedge against inflation, where historically kind of more wealthy people have done this with property and with gold. Bitcoin is a little bit easier for the more general public to access because you can download an application, you can buy small amounts. But it's definitely had the administration be very hostile towards it, trying to regulate access, the on-ramps, the off-ramps. They've tried to move people away from self-custody in their Bitcoin. Trump has come back and said, no, he's not going to do this. He's going to support people's right to self-custody. He's going to support the right to mine. So I think this is an administration which is approaching this entirely differently from the Biden administration.
And you mentioned the uses for Bitcoin. I gather you bought your football club, Real Bedford, using Bitcoin. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming you've invested quite a bit in Bitcoin, and you must be rather pleased looking at the numbers going up today.
Well, so no, I didn't buy the club with Bitcoin. I bought the club with traditional pounds, fiat money. But we have, as a football club, since we started, made the decision that we would hold Bitcoin as a treasury asset. And that's with whether we've taken sponsorships in Bitcoin or whether people have bought things at the club with Bitcoin. We sell tickets and burgers and merch for Bitcoin on a match day. Also, we took a $4.5 million investment from Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss from their family office, Winklevoss Capital, and we immediately converted that into Bitcoin. So our treasury position now, I can tell you, because I've got it up here for you, we're £1.25 million up. And for a small football club, that's a significant amount of money. And that strengthens what we're doing, because we've got quite our bold ambitions. We want to get this club firstly into the Football League, then the Premier League. And having Bitcoin as a treasury asset has made a huge difference in what we want to do.
Are you saying it's up by that much just in the last couple of days?
No. In the last few days, it's a good few 100,000, but we've been stacking Bitcoin since early 2022 in our treasury as a football club. And, we continue to stack, and we added to that with the investment that came from Tyler and Cameron. But the whole position, the whole treasury, because for every Bitcoin we receive, we track the purchase price, and then we track the increase in prices. And every single Bitcoin that we've purchased is obviously now in the green, and our total treasury position is up 1.25 million.
Okay, and at the beginning of this conversation, you said that Bitcoin's trading at about 84,000. Well, it has been at various stages in the day. I mean, some people talking about 100,000 as being the next threshold. Do you think that's just around the corner?
Yeah, I think that's fairly reasonable. I think most people thought it happened by year end, but the way it's trading at the moment, I mean, it could happen by day end today, or it could happen tomorrow. Michael Saylor's just bought, I think, another 27,000 Bitcoin. He spent $2 billion on that. There are strong rumors of nation states now stacking Bitcoin. Obviously, as you mentioned, the US government said they would hold Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And so you get into these periods with Bitcoin where the price starts to move, and people who've considered it before maybe get a little bit of FOMO and start diving in. But I think the main point is not what the price might be now or what it is in the future, is that we live in a world where governments are fiscally irresponsible. They're spending more than they bring in. Their deficits are increasing, and this leads to inflation, and that affects anyone who doesn't hold assets. And so Bitcoin is that safe haven to escape. So I don't think the short-term price matters. I don't think the long-term price matters. I think what matters is over time. If you're a hard worker and you're earning money, you want to save for the future, you can't save in pounds and dollars because the currency is being debased. You can only save in hard assets, which is gold, which is Bitcoin, which is property. And Bitcoin is just a really easy way for anyone to be able to start saving. So I think the more important point is not the short-term price movements, but overall, can you protect your wealth? And with Bitcoin, you can do that.
Okay, but just looking at the medium term, I mean, Donald Trump hasn't even taken office yet. We're about 70 days away from the 20th of January. So, I mean, would you perhaps say that Bitcoin's got a long way to go from trading around the 80,000 mark today to where it could be by the 20th of January?
Sure. I mean, look, it could be at 100, it could be 120,000. This will be my fourth bull market that I've experienced with Bitcoin. And when it starts to tear, you really aren't always prepared for what might happen. I mean, it genuinely kind of melts people's brains, the way the price can increase so rapidly. I mean, you'll see so many different predictions for next year. Some people saying, oh, it could hit 150,000. You'll have other people saying it could hit $500,000. I mean, my prediction's always been within a decade, it will be over $1 million of Bitcoin. Could happen next year. It is a fixed limit currency. There will only be 21 million. The circulating supply is probably less than 2 million. If a lot of people are trying to buy that will naturally see the price increase. So I would say be prepared to have your face melted by what might happen with this.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean, there could very well be some sort of a correction in the market. But it's interesting listening to what you're saying, because you sound like you're reading from the same song sheet as Elon Musk, who points to the fact that there's a looming, what he calls financial emergency. He says that countries are being driven into bankruptcy by what you've described as well as unsustainable debt levels. I mean, it sounds like you're more or less aligned in terms of your opinion on what Bitcoin might ultimately, the importance Bitcoin might ultimately have in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's just basic mathematics. If you understand economics, this is basic mathematics. Countries are running very high deficits. If you look at the UK now, we're almost certainly facing a sovereign debt crisis. Will that be in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Who knows? Sometimes these things can stretch out longer than you planned. But with the government continuing to increase their borrowing, the amount they're borrowing, with interest rates going up, the debt just increases more and more. I think we're at about 2.2 trillion in the UK of debt. The US is about to cross the $36 trillion threshold. there is every single Western liberal democracy has a debt issue, and nobody is facing it. No one is implementing the austerity required or the efficiencies required to slow down that debt, let alone dip into it. So if you're going to increase the debt, one thing's going to happen. We've seen it throughout history. It's pure mathematics. If you continue to increase the debt, if you continue to service it by increasing the money supply, you will get inflation. And who does that hurt the most? That hurts the poorest in society. That hurts the middle class. And so, yeah, I mean, all I can say is go and read economics in one lesson, learn basic math, and you will see the charts. You will look and see the writings on the wall. We will have a sovereign debt crisis.
And of course, a little word of caution about cryptocurrencies, because there are, I gather, 25,000 of them. They're not all as successful as Bitcoin, are they? For every one that succeeds, how many do you reckon fail?
Well, only one has really truly succeeded and the rest have all failed. And the reason they failed is the promise of cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin is decentralization. And Bitcoin is the only meaningfully decentralized cryptocurrency. All the rest are centralized, or their trajectory is to be more centralized. So they can't sit outside of government reach. They can be influenced. So I would say for the one that's created, there are thousands of thousands that have failed. I mean, I just don't pay any attention to them. I just consider them as affinity scams. They're trying to get your money. They're trying to get your Bitcoin. The only cryptocurrency anyone should pay attention to is Bitcoin.
It's interesting using the word scam, because that's how Donald Trump described Bitcoin about 3 years ago. He said this: Bitcoin just seems like a scam. I don't like it because it's another currency competing against the dollar. And that was 3 years ago. What do you reckon's changed in his mind to make him now, we could argue, as being sort of a champion of cryptocurrency, which he is now?
Well, I think a lot of people, when they first discover Bitcoin, think it might be a scam. But changing your mind is a good thing, because a man who can't change his mind can't really change anything. And if you're going to be the president of the leading country in the world, the world's police, you need to be flexible to change your mind to things. My expectation is he's spent the time with the people who truly understand Bitcoin, and they've explained it to him. And so I think now at a time where they do have a debt crisis, when people have sat down and said, look, Bitcoin not only is a potential solution to the debt crisis, but it's also creating jobs. I mean, I've been out to various states in the US where there are mining companies, and he's maybe had the time to learn about the jobs they're creating, how the miners are integrated with the grids for load balancing. I mean, once you really go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, it's very hard to come back and say, okay, this is a scam or there's something wrong with it. I think the real scam is the US dollar.
Okay, well, I'm being told we're out of time. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Peter McCormack, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.